It's a pleasure to be able to do this interview with you today. I've known you for a long time. I watched you grow in the profession till you're now doing opening addresses at conferences and webinars. And so you're bringing your life experience and your very, very great wisdom in terms of mental health services to the masses these days. And we've already done some interviews with folks who come from an experience of adoption, but not anyone who has had the experience that you've had. And so I'm certainly interested in what you might have to say about your own adoption experience and how that's informed your practice and the work that you do with clients. So why don't we start out with, because I could say a million things about you, why don't we start out with what would you like the folks watching this video to know about you?
Well, let me say right back to you that it is a joy, a pleasure, and an honor to be here with you today. And you have been an integral part of a lot of my healing and growth, both professionally and personally. And also to have you as a friend, not just a mentor and a teacher, but to have you in my life as a friend has been just such a blessing and so beautiful and life-changing for me. So thank you.
Well, thank you. My goodness. But remember, this interview is about you, not about me.
Yes, but so when you want me to share, I can't help but share that the class that I first took with Kinship Center, the first adoption clinical training that I was a part of, you were heading that up with a lot of other folk that I've come to know over the years. And it was a shocking, scary, terrifying, exciting, life-altering experience for me on so many levels, because at that point I'd already been a licensed clinician for 15 years. I had been doing mostly work with a variety of people of different ethnic descents, males and females, children and adults, families, but I did very different work than what I have come to do over the years now. I worked a lot with depression, anxiety, trauma, abuse recovery, immigration issues, self-esteem issues. But when I was approached to do the ACT training by a friend who's also a colleague, I was not interested. As I know you've heard me share before, I was not interested. I was adopted at birth. I was probably 9 days old when I came to my mom and dad. And I had always known since I was little that I was adopted, and my mom and dad were very loving and not perfect, right? But they were available to me in so many ways. So I didn't think that adoption had any effect on me. Now, looking back, I realized that there was a lot of things that had to do with adoption that affected me in both negative and positive ways, but I didn't know that then. I was really in a lot of denial. And taking the ACT was an eye-opener for me. So first I had to process that all personally before I could even process it professionally, because I was just in shock.
Wow.
Over how far-reaching adoption was in my life. And I had been in denial of it. And I had a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts and a lot of behaviors that came from what I've come to know now are the 7 core issues.
Wow.
So I had to do my own healing work before I could move forward and help other people do their healing work around this. I'm going to pause there for a minute. Any other questions or anything else that might bring up for you, or do you want me to
don't worry about it, because I'll jump in and redirect or ask further. Just let me be here with you, and don't worry whether you're on target or anything like that. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, just keep going. I mean, you're introducing yourself to the folks who are viewing, and
well, I can't keep going.
Not. Pardon me, Graham. You're not muted.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's okay.
You need to be muted. Now, okay, got it. Okay, go ahead, Dee Dee. Yeah.
Yeah, as you all know, I can continue to talk. So what happened for me during that first year was it was so life altering that I realized I did have to find my own birth family. And I started with my birth mother. So by the time we finished the classes, I had found my birth mother. And that was unbelievable. And it was, what can I say? It really was life altering. It affected me. It affected my mom and my dad that I grew up with. It affected my brother. My parents adopted a little boy that was not my biological brother 3 years after adopting me. But that was the only brother I knew, and this was the family I knew. And when I was adopted, it was a time where everything was secrecy. There was secrecy that shrouded adoption. And everyone thought that, a family needs a child and a child needs a family. And once we bring them together, everybody will live happily ever after. Well, to some degree they do, but oftentimes they don't. There's a lot of challenges and struggles to go through. And if you don't understand the 7 core issues and how someone's life is impacted by adoption, then it's really hard to overcome some of those challenges and move through it to get to a better place. And I learned it wasn't just myself that was affected by adoption. It was my mom and dad as well. It was my brother as well. It was my biological parents as well. It was my biological siblings that I found out I had as well.
Wow.
So it was fascinating to me as a therapist to see the far-reaching, touch that adoption had in all of our lives. And I could see those 7 core issues come to life, like, oh, wow, this is real. This really has happened to all of us.
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 minute and just say that for folks watching this, they don't know anything about the adoption clinical training. And I did want to say that it's a 48-hour training that takes place over several months. So you had time to take it in, digest it, play with it, and do something with it, that it wasn't just a quick course. I just think it's important for viewers to know that.
Oh, yeah, it was profound.
Yeah. Okay.
It was a very deep, profound training, and an important training. I'm glad we're still doing it. I am so honored to be a trainer in the adoption clinical training program. But it really impressed upon me so many things, and not just about adoption, because as you know, if you notice, the first 15 years, I was not focused on working in the world of adoption. I had nothing to do with it.
Yes.
And I'll even go back further. I've had 5 therapists in my lifetime. I'm now 65. So over the years, I've had numerous therapists and worked on different issues in my life. But none of them understood adoption. None of them understood the depth and the profundity of how adoption impacts your life. And so I never worked on these issues with anyone. They all knew I was adopted. It wasn't like I hid that fact, but they weren't well versed in this. And that's also because a lot of us in the field were not well versed with some of these themes and ideas. And for those who don't know the 7 core issues, it's about loss, rejection, guilt and shame, grief, identity, mastery and control, and intimacy. I didn't do it in the right order, but those were the themes that get triggered by, the process of adoption for all of us. And so the other thing that really became clear to me is how important attachment is. Yeah. And I always understood that attachment was important, but becoming a part of the world of adoption and the constellation of adoption, which goes beyond just the triad, beyond just the child, the adoptive family, and the birth family. It's everyone involved in the world of adoption. I started to realize, oh my goodness, this issue of attachment would be so helpful to all of my clients, even if they're not adopted. And that a lot of my clients had trauma because there were attachment issues in their life that had nothing to do with adoption. There were other reasons why that existed in their lives. And so it just made me a better therapist all the way around. And so a lot of the tools and skills and knowledge that I learned from taking the ACT, as well as becoming a trainer, has made me a better therapist as well as a better person.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, so many questions that come up. How did you help your adoptive parents deal with your awakening and your reaching out to your family of origin?
Well, my mom and dad were always supportive of me looking for them. But when I was a kid, I realized now I just didn't want to hear it. And I was like this, la, 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 la. Don't talk to me about it. And I remember clearly telling my mother would tell me this on Mother's Day. And I remember one time when I was a teenager, which of course it happens when you're a teenager, because a lot of us in our teen years are a bit mouthy. My mom said on Mother's Day, you know, honey, I've always had this dream that one day a lady would come to knock on the door of our house and say, hello, I'm your daughter's birth mother, and I just would like to meet all of you and thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, I did not want to hear that. And I was like, okay, Mom, well, I'm glad you had that thought and that dream, but I don't need it. So if you want to look for her, you can, but I'm not interested.
Boy, that
That's what
helpful
my
for
mother
people
would
to
say.
hear. This is so helpful for people to hear because they so often say, well, my kids weren't interested.
Yeah, I was not. And my mom was saying, you know, we're going to support you if you want to look for them. We want to help you. I want to thank her.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, okay, fine. You thank her. You find her. I don't need to thank her. I don't need to find her. You're my mother. And it really was about protecting myself from all of those thoughts and feelings that are normal to have when you're adopted, right? Like, who do I look like? Because I didn't look like my family growing up, and neither did my brother. So I always felt like I just appeared on the planet. I just poof appeared.
Wow.
Because you sometimes, if you're adopted older, you might have your birth story. But when you're adopted at birth, and in the 1950s, when I was adopted, they don't give you a lot of information. So I didn't know my birth story. I didn't know a birth origin. I didn't have a pretty story. So my birth story was the story my mom and dad had. Well, we got a call from the adoption agency, and they had told us that, you know, we had a little girl and were we interested? Because my parents were told it would take 5 years to get a baby, and almost 9 months to the day that they started the process, they get this call about me. So they weren't expecting me. They had no diapers, they had no crib, they had no clothes, they had no food, they had nothing. So of course they are ecstatic, and they go running all over town. My mom calls her sister up, who happened to be living in the country. My parents are from Mexico, but they came here to go to graduate school, met each other, fell in love, got married, and then, you know, adopted my brother and I. But my auntie lived here. And so my mom calls her up. My auntie's running all over town trying to buy things. And they went to go pick me up. And then they bring me home. And by the time they get home, my auntie's there with a crib and a, you know, and clothes and bottles and all of the things that I needed. But that was the story that I was told. That was my birth story. But that's really not my birth. That's just how I came to my family.
Right. It was your second birth, the birth into your adoptive family, but not your first birth into the world.
Right. And I don't really know much about my first birth because my birth mother can't remember.
Oh my.
Yeah. You know, as I've come to learn through you and other things that I've done and read, was that she was traumatized by having to give me up. She made some choices, and I was a result of those choices, and she could not take care of me. And so she just kind of zoned it all out, and she could not remember a lot of things. So even when I found her, I got some answers that were important for me, but some answers I will never have. And even though she's passed away, I still would never have them, even if she was alive, because she's either blocked them out, or is too embarrassed to talk about it, or it's too painful to talk about, or she just simply did not remember. So there is information that we're not going to get. When we go into search and reunion, if we decide to do that, we think we're going to get all the answers, but we don't. And we have to learn to live with that. We'll get some answers, but we won't get them all.
And some may be answers that go against fantasies that you may have had all your life, and you have to kind of reorient, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. because oftentimes we tend to, as children, think of things as black or white, right? All or nothing. You're either kind or you're mean. You're good or you're bad.
Right.
So for me, what I did with that is my biological parents are the bad ones because they made a mistake and they couldn't keep me. And so they were bad for not keeping me. And my adoptive parents are the angels. They're the good ones. They're the loving ones. They're the ones that took care of me and my brother and,
Yeah.
gave us a life and a good education and all of that. So in my mind, it was, split. But then you have to think about this. Whose blood do I have in me? I have the blood of the people I consider the bad people.
Wow.
So how can I not see myself as bad? How
Mhm.
can I not see myself as tainted or at fault in some way? And so a lot of that shame and guilt was there. So I spent a lot of my life trying to be perfect, so that I wouldn't get left again or abandoned again. And I also have to add that my father was a Baptist minister. He was also the son of a Baptist minister, and my mother.
Your adoptive father.
Yes.
Okay.
When I say my father and mother, I'm talking about the people that brought me up.
Okay.
When I'm talking about my biological parents, I will use that term. Other people use first family, or they just say mom and dad. But for me, my mom and dad are the people that brought me up.
Okay.
So my mother was also the daughter of a Baptist minister. So there's a lot of religious stuff in my background. And that religious stuff, with that comes the idea of we have to be good examples. And in my little kid brain, I had to be perfect. So not only do I have to be perfect because I'm adopted and I don't want you to give me away and not love me, but I also have to be perfect to be a good little Christian girl.
Wow.
And then, yeah. And then throw into the mix being a person of color, being Latina, and growing up in a country where there's a lot of racial divide and a lot of bias, and it was challenging. So I recognize I cannot say everything I had to deal with had to do with adoption, but it certainly was a big layer of things that I had to deal with. So my mom and dad were supportive of me doing it, but what they didn't realize was when it actually started happening, that they too would have thoughts and feelings that came up for them that they did not anticipate.
Yeah.
My father never really talked about it much. That was kind of how he was. He didn't like conflict, and he was very sweet and loving, and he would rarely be negative about things. So I don't really know, honestly, how my father felt about my finding my birth mom and my birth dad. He was very accepting and kind when he met her. They never met my birth dad. My mom was a lot more open to meeting my birth mom because, again, she idealized her and wanted to thank her. But she wasn't so thrilled about my birth dad, so she never wanted to meet him. And now they're both gone. Now my mom and dad both passed away. But that was interesting to me. So I remember when my mother saw me. So the first time I went to meet my birth mother, she was living in the Chicago area in Illinois, and that's where I was born. And that's where my parents were living in Indiana at the time when they adopted me. So when I went, I knew I could not go with my mom and dad. I knew that it was going to be a really big thing for me to do. And that if I would do it going with my mom and dad, I would be more worried and concerned about their feelings and their process and what was going on for them. And I wanted to protect them. Because I would never talk to them about how I felt about being adopted. I just kept everything inside, and it was in there for so long, I started to deny it myself. So I denied it to them, and I denied it from myself. And it wasn't anything bad. It was just being curious or wondering who I looked like or why they gave me up, right? But again, the little Christian part that I was brought up to believe is don't be mad about it. Don't be upset about it. Look, you got this great family and they love you and everything turned out fine. So why do you have any thoughts or feelings about those people?
Right.
Right. And if you do, they should not be negative. So I knew that when I went to go meet her for the first time, I could not do it with my mom and dad, which was a little hard for my mom. I don't know again about my dad because he never talked about it. but it was hard for my mom to see me do something so monumental without her.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I did, because it was overwhelming to meet my birth mom and to have, I stayed with her for 5 days the first time I went to go meet her. And then to meet a sister, a half sister I didn't even know I had. And then to meet uncles and aunts and cousins. And it was amazing to see my body. It was amazing to see certain things about me that came from my birth mom, certain things about me that were similar to my sister and I. It was shocking to me and exciting to me. And I was so happy to see that I looked like someone. I never had anyone that I looked like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So where did the hips come from? Or where did my face come from? Or where did my hands come from? Or, and then the personality types, and to see, I had a lot of things that were similar to my birth mother's personality. And that was odd because we didn't spend any time together.
Yeah.
She saw me for a few minutes at the hospital, and then that was it, because in those days, she was even lucky to have seen me.
Right.
Most of them believed at that time, the baby's gone, you don't even have to see it, go on with your life and be happy. Live long and prosper.
You're sharing so much that's helpful to up and coming professionals, or parents, or adopted people that might be watching this and sharing your experience. But you have one added piece that I find incredibly rich, and I want to make sure in our limited time that you get to touch on it, because one of the things you've been lecturing on more recently has to do with the blending of cultures and race, and because so much of the bridges that adopted people have to make, particularly in a transracial parent-child relationship, are not really addressed very well in our society, or the prejudices that a child might feel over and above being adopted if they don't look like their family. Could you talk a bit about that? Because it feels like a new territory that folks need to be aware of.
Well, there's like two parts to that. There's the part of growing up as a person of color in this country in general, and having to deal with institutionalized racism and microaggressions. And then there's the part of being in a family where you're adopted and you're a different culture or a different race. So there's the outer layer where the world is impeding on your psyche, so to speak, or your development.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you face that world if you don't have healthy self-esteem and good boundaries and can validate your reality, right? If you didn't get the attachment piece you needed when you were a child growing up, whether you're, a newborn baby or you're 8 years old, because we talk about children who are adopted older. If there was no attachment piece by their birth or first family, it can still happen with their adoptive family or a foster or a resource family, but they have to work at that, and that they can still make that attachment piece happen even later.
Mm-hmm.
So there was many layers to the whole ethnic thing for me. One of them was the outer experience of racism for me was impacted by the fact that my parents, even though they were born and raised in Mexico, were very well educated. And so when they came here to go to grad school. That's where they met. And so for them, education was an important piece that they really wanted for their children. So they worked hard to send us to private schools and get us into, schools that would prepare us for college. So there was no question that I was going to go to college or even beyond, a BA, which I did. And so it was expected, where my father was the pastor of a church that was in a poor area where most people were not well educated. And so here I'm going to a school where there's not a lot of children of color. It's predominantly white or Caucasian, if you will, people with money, people who are well educated. And then I'm going to my parents' church where there's poverty, there's teen pregnancy, there's gang stuff, there's drugs. And I began to develop a sense of myself as a Latina as not liking that part of me and not wanting to acknowledge that part of me and not wanting to be Latina. So I spent a lot of time hating myself and hating my ethnic self and denying it for many years. And yet I wouldn't talk about it. I wouldn't express it because I would feel guilty saying anything bad. And so over time, therapy helped me with that and come to a place where I learned to love and honor and accept myself as a Latina woman in this country. But then we have the other layers of the adoption piece. So the other layer of the adoption piece is, and if you hear this, I'm calling myself a Latina. I grew up and was born and raised in a Latino home, but I am half Armenian by birth and half Mexican. Mm-hmm. My birth father is Mexican, my birth mother is Armenian. But I have no knowledge, I have no experience, I have no roots, I have no history, I have no food, I have no music, I have no connection to my Armenian self. So I lost that in the adoption. And even though my mom and dad tried in different ways as a kid to expose me to that, I didn't want anything to do with that. I didn't understand that. I didn't know what that was. That's not us. Mm-hmm. My mom and dad were not Armenian. So I don't want a fake exposure going to an Armenian festival or doing things in an Armenian community when it didn't feel right to me. It felt weird. I didn't know their language. I didn't know their food. It looked weird. It tasted weird. So I just pushed that aside. And so my mom and dad tried to expose me to that, but I would have nothing to do with it. And so when you are adopted into a family that's a different culture, a different race, if that family doesn't, from the beginning, incorporate those parts of your culture or your race into their everyday life, and if those people don't already from the beginning have a multicultural lifestyle and a multicultural group of friends and family, how can you manufacture that for that child? How can you make that up for that child? You can't. It doesn't feel normal. It doesn't feel right. So whenever they tried to do that, it just was weird to me, and I didn't want anything to do with it. So I think that we really have to encourage people, because we want to reduce the amount of loss and trauma kids have as a result of being adopted. And so yes, if you're a different culture or race, you can adopt kids of a different culture and race, but I would really prefer to try to find families of similar cultural backgrounds or racial backgrounds for those kids, because they're already going to have enough things to have to deal with and enough differences to have to look at that it just reduces that for them. So over the years, I've learned more about my Armenian self, and I've come to like a lot of Armenian food. And one of my dearest friends is Armenian, and her family has adopted me. So I've, over time, come to know some parts of me, but it still doesn't feel like it's me.
Yeah. You know, I could listen to you for hours, and we're going to have to wrap up the interview. So I want to say a couple things. For those of you who would like to know more about Dee Dee, her biography is on the NCAP site. Also, she did a wonderful webinar around many of these issues, and they're also on the NCAP site, the National Center for Adoption and Permanency. So you can get to know Dee Dee at an even deeper level, and you could reach out to her. I know that your practice and your teaching are incredibly wonderful. I also know that you're an artist, a jewelry maker, a passionately good cook. You're a very well-rounded person, and I want people to know those aspects of you. But as we come to the end, I would love to know, when you're no longer on this plane of existence, and people are talking about you and doing a eulogy or a testament to you, what is it that you would like to be remembered for?
Well, a lot of those things you mentioned about me really come from my need to be driven and to be perfect, and to be awesome. So that you will love me and not leave me,
Ah, okay.
right? But
Yeah.
I've come to let that settle inside of me and be at peace with that and recognize, okay, this is where it came from, but I don't have to continue to have that be a toxic part of my life. So I enjoy the parts of me that love to travel and love to cook and love to learn new things and loves to make jewelry and loves to like do all kinds of things. And that I'm just a curious person and I like to learn. I guess that, you know, my mom and dad said that the name that they gave me, so my legal name is not Didi. My legal name is Evita Mascarenas. And there was a lot of trauma around that. I didn't mention this with the racial piece, but going to private schools with predominantly rich Caucasian folk, they could never say my name, and that was a source of shame for me.
Wow.
So
Okay.
Didi was my nickname, and Didi became the name that people could say because they could never say Evita Mascarenas.
Mm.
So my name became Idida, Idida, Mascara, Moscone, Aida, Adidas, anything but my name. So my mom and dad told me, and it took a long time for me to love my name, but now I've had this Didi name for so long that it's my professional name. But my mom and dad said my name meant sincere.
Oh.
And I guess I hope that people will recognize that I do have my faults. I'm not perfect. There are things about me that sometimes can be hard to handle because I could be real intense and I can tend towards perfectionism. But I try to have an awareness about that and pull back from that and try to move into my higher self or into a more loving place about who I am with myself and with others in the world. And so I hope that they can see the sincerity of my desire to be of service to others and to be of help to others and of comfort to others. And I hope that I learn to do that for myself as well. So yeah, I guess I hope that they see that I was sincerely trying to do my best.
Well, I sincerely thank Adita Mascarenas for so much of what you shared today. You're a wonderful example of what we learn if we do a kind of a deep dive into the self and are not afraid to capture that information and use it to get to know ourselves better. And I know that's what you do with your clients. I thank you. I thank you so much for this. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank
You
you.
as well. And thank you for this opportunity. And thank you for everything you've taught me and for your love and caring and support.
That you always have, sincerely.